Gunshots echoed through the dusty streets of Silver Creek as Zara Mitchell pressed her back against the rough wooden wall of the church, her heart pounding like a spooked horse against her ribs. It was 1875, and the small Wyoming territory town that had promised a fresh start now threatened to be her grave. Her wedding dress, once pristine white, was now soiled with dirt and torn at the hem from her desperate flight from the altar. The footsteps grew closer. Zara held her breath, clutching the small Derringer pistol her father had given her before he passed. She had never imagined using it on her wedding day, especially not against the man she was supposed to marry. But that was before she discovered what kind of monster Lawrence Blackwood truly was. "Miss?" The voice came from around the corner of the church, and Zara nearly fired the gun in surprise. She whirled to find not the face of her enraged fiancé or one of his hired guns, but instead a tall stranger with eyes the color of a summer storm. Dust covered his denim pants and worn leather vest. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see the concern etched across his features. The cowboy held out his hat and said, "You coming with me?" Zara stared at him, bewildered. "I beg your pardon?" "Name's Quentin Hayes, madam," he said, his voice low and urgent. "And unless I'm mistaken, you're running from something fierce. I've got a horse waiting, and we need to move. Now." Another gunshot rang out, closer this time, followed by shouting. Lawrence's men were combing the town. "Why would you help me?" Zara asked, still pressed against the church wall. "Because no woman in a wedding dress hides behind a church unless she's in real trouble," Quentin replied. "And I've never been one to leave folks in trouble." Zara hesitated only a moment longer before accepting his outstretched hand. His skin was rough with calluses, his grip firm but gentle. "Hold tight," he instructed as he led her around the back of the church, where a magnificent chestnut stallion stood waiting. With practiced ease, Quentin swung himself into the saddle and pulled Zara up behind him. "Wrap your arms around my waist," he ordered, and she complied, her wedding dress bunching awkwardly between them. The horse took off like a shot, thundering away from Silver Creek as Zara clung to this mysterious stranger. The wind whipped tears from her eyes, or perhaps they were already there. Remnants of the terrible day that had begun with hope and descended into horror. "Where are we going?" she shouted over the rushing wind. "Somewhere safe," was all he said, spurring the horse faster. As they crested a hill, Zara risked a glance back at the town shrinking in the distance. The white steeple of the church stood tall against the vast Wyoming sky, a stark reminder of vows never exchanged. She should have felt relief, but all she felt was fear and uncertainty. She knew nothing about this cowboy except his name and the fact that he just made himself an enemy of Lawrence Blackwood, one of the most powerful men in the territory. "Thank you," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if he could hear her over the thundering hooves. Quentin rode hard for nearly an hour before slowing the horse to a walk. They had entered a dense stretch of pine forest, following what appeared to be a game trail rather than any established path. "We'll stop here for a moment," he said, dismounting and helping Zara down from the horse. Her legs trembled beneath her, unused to such riding. "You want to tell me why half the men in Silver Creek were hunting you down on your wedding day?" Quentin asked, removing his bandana and dipping it in a nearby stream before offering it to her. Zara took the damp cloth gratefully and wiped the dust from her face. "I was supposed to marry Lawrence Blackwood today." Quentin's expression darkened. "The cattle baron?" "Yes. My father owed him money before he died 6 months ago. Lawrence offered to forgive the debt if I married him." She looked down at her ruined dress. "It seemed like the only way to save our ranch. What changed your mind?" Zara met his gaze steadily. "I overheard him talking to his foreman just before the ceremony. He plans to sell my father's land to the railroad once we were married. But worse than that, he was laughing about the other women, the ones who disappeared after displeasing him." She shuddered. 3 wives in 10 years, all dead from accidents. Quentin's jaw tightened. "I've heard rumors about Blackwood. Nothing good. When I confronted him, Zara's voice faltered. He showed me his true nature. I ran, and now he'll kill me for humiliating him in front of the entire town." "Not if I have anything to say about it," Quentin said firmly. "I've got a cabin about 2 hours' ride from here. We can rest there and figure out our next move." "Our next move," Zara echoed. "Mr. Hayes, you've done more than enough already. I can't ask you to risk your life further." A small smile played at the corner of his mouth. "Miss Mitchell, the moment I offered you my hat back at that church, I threw my lot in with yours. Besides, Lawrence Blackwood has been pushing smaller ranchers out of this territory for years. I'm not exactly sorry to find myself opposing him." He offered her a canteen of water, which she accepted gratefully. "You're a rancher?" she asked after taking a long drink. "Was," he corrected. "Had a small spread near Cheyenne. Blackwood's men diverted the creek that watered my land. By the time I proved it in court, my cattle had died and the bank had foreclosed." His expression remained neutral. But Zara could see the pain in his eyes. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "That was 2 years ago. I've been working as a guide trapper and occasionally helping the marshal track down troublemakers." He took back the canteen and secured it to his saddle. "We should keep moving. Blackwood knows these lands well." They continued their journey deeper into the forest, the afternoon sun filtering through the pine branches. Zara tried to ignore the growing discomfort of her restrictive wedding clothes and the fear that gnawed at her insides. What would become of her now? The ranch was likely already lost, and she had no family left, no money of her own. "There it is," Quentin finally said as they emerged into a small clearing. The cabin was modest, but sturdy-looking, with a stone chimney and a small covered porch. A corral stood empty to one side. "It's not much," he said as he helped her dismount, "but it's safe. No one knows about this place except me and a few trusted friends." Inside, the cabin was simple but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a small kitchen area beside it. A rough-hewn table with 2 chairs sat in the center of the main room, and Zara could see a doorway leading to what must be a bedroom. "You can take the bedroom," Quentin said, reading her thoughts. "I'll sleep out here." "I couldn't possibly—" "You've had a difficult day, Miss Mitchell. I insist." Too exhausted to argue, Zara nodded gratefully. "Thank you. And please, call me Zara." A small smile crossed his face. Zara. He tested the name as if weighing it. "I'll get a fire going. There's a trunk with some clothes in the bedroom. They belonged to my sister before she moved back east. They might not fit perfectly, but they'll be more comfortable than a wedding dress." Left alone in the bedroom, Zara found herself staring at her reflection in a small mirror hanging on the wall. Her face was smudged with dirt, her carefully arranged hair now falling in disheveled waves around her shoulders. The woman looking back at her seemed like a stranger, frightened, yes, but also strangely free. In the trunk, she found several simple dresses, undergarments, and even a pair of riding pants and a shirt that must have belonged to Quentin's sister. After some hesitation, she chose the riding clothes, reasoning they would be more practical if they needed to flee again. When she emerged from the bedroom, Quentin was kneeling by the fireplace, coaxing flames from kindling. He glanced up, and for a moment, surprise registered on his face. "My sister Hannah was always more comfortable in trousers than dresses," he said, standing. "Said she couldn't ride properly in all those skirts." "I hope you don't mind," Zara said, suddenly self-conscious. "Not at all. They suit you." He gestured to the table where he had laid out some dried meat, biscuits, and canned peaches. "It's not much of a wedding feast, but it'll keep your strength up." Zara found herself smiling despite everything. "It looks wonderful." As they ate, Quentin explained that they would need to leave at first light. "Blackwood won't give up easily. We need to get you to a larger town, maybe Denver or even San Francisco, somewhere he doesn't have influence." "What about you?" Zara asked. "I can't ask you to abandon your life here." Quentin's laugh held no humor. "What life? I guide city folks on hunting trips and live alone in this cabin. There's nothing keeping me here." "Still, you barely know me. Why risk everything?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. My youngest sister, Elizabeth, was married to a man like Blackwood. Wealthy, respected in the community. Behind closed doors, he was a monster. His voice grew tight. By the time we realized it was too late, she died from her injuries before we could help her. "I'm so sorry," Zara whispered. "I couldn't help Elizabeth, but I can help you." His gray eyes met hers across the table, filled with a quiet determination that made her breath catch. "Get some rest, Zara. Tomorrow will be a long day." That night, as Zara lay in Quentin's bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the forest around the cabin, she wondered at the strange turn her life had taken. Yesterday she had resigned herself to a loveless marriage to save her father's legacy. Today she was a fugitive, dependent on the kindness of a stranger with sad eyes and gentle hands. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by nightmares of Lawrence finding her, of being dragged back to Silver Creek. Each time she woke with a start, heart racing, only to hear the reassuring sound of Quentin moving quietly in the main room, keeping watch. They set out before dawn, Quentin having packed supplies and saddled his horse Storm. He called him while Zara was still blinking sleep from her eyes. He had insisted she wear a spare hat of his pulled low over her face, and had given her one of his old coats, reasoning that anyone looking for her would be seeking a woman in a wedding dress or feminine attire. "Where exactly are we headed?" she asked as they rode side by side, having borrowed a mare that Quentin said belonged to a friend who kept her pastured nearby. "There's a trading post about a day's ride from here," he explained. "The owner, Joseph Blue, is a good man. He can help us get supplies for a longer journey and maybe lend us a wagon. It'll be easier to travel that way than on horseback, especially if we need to move quickly." The day passed in relative quiet, with Quentin pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of his years in the territory. He had come west after the war, he told her, seeking a fresh start like so many others. He'd worked cattle drives, tried his hand at prospecting, and finally settled on his small ranch until Blackwood had taken that from him too. "You never tried to get revenge?" Zara asked. Quentin shook his head. "Revenge is a luxury that costs more than most can afford. I've seen too many men destroyed by that path. And yet here you are, helping me escape the man who ruined you." A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his solemn features. "Well, I never said I didn't enjoy the idea of causing him some trouble." As the day wore on, Zara found herself studying Quentin when he wasn't looking. He was handsome in a weathered way, with lines at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he smiled. His movements were economical, confident, like a man comfortable in his own skin. There was a steadiness to him that she found immensely reassuring after the chaos of the previous day. They made camp that night in a sheltered hollow, with Quentin insisting on taking the first watch, despite Zara's protests that she could do her part. "I'm used to sleeping light and not much," he said firmly. "Rest while you can." Wrapped in a blanket by the small fire, Zara found herself thinking of her father. What would he think of her now? Would he be disappointed that she had run from the arrangement he had made, or would he understand her fear? Alexander Mitchell had been a proud man, stubborn to a fault, but he had always told Zara that her happiness was what mattered most to him. "I wish you were here, Papa," she whispered to the stars. "I could use your guidance now." "Your father," Quentin's voice came softly from across the fire, startling her. What was he like? Zara hadn't realized he could hear her. He was larger than life. Came west with nothing but dreams and worked himself to the bone building our ranch. He loved that land more than anything. "Except you," Quentin added. "Yes," she agreed, a lump forming in her throat. "Except me. After my mother died when I was 10, it was just the two of us against the world. He taught me to ride, to shoot, to run the ranch. He said I was as capable as any son could have been." Sounds like a wise man. He was. Until the drought came 2 years ago. We lost half our cattle, and then the bank called in loans early. He started drinking, making risky deals with men like Lawrence. She sighed. I tried to talk sense into him, but grief and pride are a dangerous combination. That they are, Quentin agreed quietly. After a pause, he added, "Try to sleep, Zara. I'll wake you if there's trouble." When she next opened her eyes, dawn was breaking. Quentin was already up, brewing coffee over a fresh fire. He handed her a tin cup without comment, his own eyes shadowed with lack of sleep. "Did you rest at all?" she asked. "Enough," was his only reply. They reached the trading post by midday, a collection of log buildings nestled in a valley. A faded sign proclaimed it, "Blues Trading Post and General Store." "Stay close," Quentin murmured as they approached. "Joseph is trustworthy, but we can't be sure about everyone else." The interior of the store was dim after the bright sunlight outside. Shelves lined the walls, filled with everything from canned goods to tools, fabric to ammunition. A tall man with a silver-streaked beard stood behind the counter, eyes widening as he recognized Quentin. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, coming around to clasp Quentin's hand. "Thought you might be dead in a ditch somewhere." "Not yet, Joseph," Quentin replied with a small smile, "though not for lack of trying on some people's part." Joseph's gaze shifted to Zara, curiosity evident in his weathered face. "And who might this be?" "This is my cousin Zachary," Quentin said smoothly, "visiting from back east." Understanding flickered in Joseph's eyes as he took in Zara's disguise. "Welcome, young man. Any family of Quentins is welcome here." He led them to a back room where they could speak privately. Once the door was closed, Quentin quickly explained their situation, though Zara noticed he left out specifics about who was pursuing them. "Lawrence Blackwood," Joseph guessed, his expression grim. "Heard he was getting married yesterday, then heard his bride ran off and he's offering a mighty handsome reward for her return." Zara's stomach clenched with fear. "How much?" $500, dead or alive." "He can't do that," she protested. "I'm not a criminal." "Men like Blackwood make their own laws out here," Joseph said grimly, "and there are plenty who'd kill for less money." "We need to get to Denver," Quentin said. "Can you help us?" Joseph stroked his beard thoughtfully. "I've got a wagon you can use, and there's a trail that skirts the main roads. It'll take longer, but you're less likely to run into trouble." He glanced at Zara. "But you'll need a better disguise than just men's clothes if you're going to make it all the way to Denver." "What do you suggest?" she asked. A slow smile spread across Joseph's face. "How do you feel about becoming an Indian?" 2 hours later, Zara barely recognized herself in the small mirror Joseph provided. Her fair skin had been darkened with a mixture of walnut juice and ash, and her golden brown hair was hidden beneath a black wig Joseph said had belonged to his late Shoshone wife. Traditional clothing completed the transformation. "Remember to keep your eyes down around strangers," Joseph instructed as he loaded supplies into the wagon he'd provided. "Most white folks won't look too closely at an Indian woman, especially if she seems shy." Quentin had changed as well, trading his cowboy attire for the clothes of a frontier preacher, complete with a worn Bible and white collar. "Reverend John Smith," he said with a wry smile when Zara raised an eyebrow at his transformation. "Traveling with his converted Shoshone helper." "No one will believe you're a preacher," she said, trying not to laugh at the incongruous sight. "You'd be surprised what people will believe when it fits what they expect to see," Joseph commented. "A preacher and an Indian woman will draw far less suspicion than a young white couple on the run." As they prepared to leave, Joseph pulled Quentin aside for a private word. Zara busied herself adjusting the unfamiliar clothes, but couldn't help overhearing snippets of their conversation. "Dangerous game you're playing, Quentin. Didn't have a choice. Worth dying for?" She pretended not to notice the intense look Joseph gave her before they departed, or the way Quentin's face had flushed at whatever his friend had said. The wagon was old but sturdy, with a canvas cover that provided some protection from the elements, and more importantly, concealed them from casual observation. Quentin drove while Zara sat beside him, practicing the demure posture Joseph had recommended for her disguise. "Joseph seems like a good friend," she commented as they left the trading post behind. "The best," Quentin agreed. "Saved my life once during a blizzard. Found me half frozen and nursed me back to health. He's worried about you." Quentin's hands tightened on the reins. "Joseph worries too much." They traveled until dusk, following the hidden trail Joseph had marked on a rough map. As Quentin made camp, Zara tried to help, only to find herself frustrated by her lack of outdoor skills. "I'm sorry," she said after dropping the coffee pot for the third time. "I'm not much use." "Am I?" Quentin looked up from the fire he was building. "You've spent your life on a ranch, not on the trail. Different skills. Still, I should be able to make coffee without creating a disaster." He smiled then, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "If it makes you feel better, I couldn't tell a heifer from a steer when I first started ranching." "You're just saying that." "Cross my heart, nearly got trampled trying to milk a bull." The absurd image made her laugh out loud, the sound startling in the quiet evening. Quentin looked pleased at her reaction, and something warm unfurled in Zara's chest at the realization that he'd been trying to make her feel better. That night, as they sat by the fire eating a simple meal of beans and biscuits, Zara found herself studying Quentin again. Without his cowboy hat, his dark hair fell across his forehead in a way that made him look younger, less guarded. "What?" he asked, catching her gaze. "I was just thinking that you make a very unconvincing preacher," she replied, deflecting from her true thoughts. He chuckled. "I'll have you know I attended church every Sunday growing up. My mother would have had my hide otherwise." "Where is your family now?" she asked. "My parents passed years ago. Influenza. Hannah, my older sister, is married with 3 children in Boston. Elizabeth," his voice faltered. "Well, you know about Elizabeth. I'm sorry for bringing up painful memories." He shook his head. "Don't be. It's good to talk about her sometimes. Keeps her memory alive." He poked at the fire with a stick. "What about you? Any siblings?" "No, just me. My mother had several miscarriages after I was born. I think that's why my father was so protective of me. I was all he had left of her." They fell into comfortable silence, the crackling of the fire and the distant calls of night birds the only sounds. Zara found herself grateful for this quiet moment of peace, knowing it might not last. "Quentin," she said finally, voicing the question that had been bothering her, "what happens when we reach Denver?" He looked up, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "You'll be safe there. It's a big city, growing bigger every day. Blackwood's influence doesn't reach that far. You can start over." "And you?" He shrugged. "I'll make sure you're settled, then head back, I suppose." "Back to what? You said yourself there's nothing for you here." "It's still home," he said simply. "Lawrence will kill you if he finds out you helped me," Zara said, fear clutching at her heart. "You can't go back." "I've dealt with men like him before." "Not like Lawrence," she insisted. "He won't stop until he's destroyed you. He's obsessed with power, with control. I've seen what he does to people who cross him." Quentin was quiet for a long moment. "What would you have me do, Zara? Come with you to Denver? Start over myself?" "Why not?" she challenged. "What's really keeping you here?" He didn't answer immediately, staring into the flames as if they held some secret message. "There are ghosts," he said finally. "Things I haven't made peace with yet." "Your sister?" "Partly, and other things from the war." He looked up, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "I'm not good company, Zara. I've spent too long alone." "You seem like good company to me," she said softly. The look he gave her then was so full of longing and uncertainty that it made her breath catch. For a moment, she thought he might say more, might bridge the distance between them. Instead, he stood abruptly. "We should get some rest. Long day tomorrow." Zara tried not to feel disappointed as she arranged her bedroll under the wagon as Quentin had suggested. She was being foolish, she told herself. Her life was in chaos. She was running for her safety, and here she was developing feelings for the first man who had shown her kindness. It was nothing more than gratitude and the heightened emotions of their situation. Still, as she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to have Quentin Hayes look at her with something more than concern and duty in his eyes. Their journey continued for the next 3 days without incident. The trail Joseph had marked took them through sparsely populated areas, and the few travelers they encountered seemed to accept Quentin's preacher disguise without question. No one looked twice at Zara in her Shoshone clothing, just as Joseph had predicted. On the 4th day, however, their luck changed. They had stopped at a small creek to water the horses and stretch their legs when the sound of approaching riders reached them. Quentin tensed, his hand moving instinctively to the gun hidden beneath his preacher's coat. "Stay in character," he murmured to Zara as 3 men on horseback came into view. Zara lowered her eyes as she'd been instructed, but not before recognizing one of the riders, Frank Miller, Lawrence's foreman. Her heart hammered in her chest as the men drew closer. "Afternoon, Reverend," the lead rider called, reining in his horse. "Fine day for traveling." "Indeed it is, my friend," Quentin replied, his voice taking on a measured, sermonizing quality that almost made Zara smile despite her fear. "God has blessed us with fair weather." Frank's eyes slid over Quentin without much interest before landing on Zara. She kept her gaze firmly on the ground, praying the disguise would hold. "You headed to Denver?" Frank asked. "The Lord's work takes me where it is needed," Quentin replied. "But yes, Denver is our destination. Are you bound the same way?" Frank shook his head. "Looking for someone. A young woman who ran off from Silver Creek a few days back, blonde, pretty, might be traveling with a man." "I have not seen such a person," Quentin said, managing to sound both truthful and regretful. "But I will certainly keep an eye out. Is the young lady in some kind of trouble?" "You could say that," Frank replied with a nasty smile. "She's a thief, stole valuable property from her betrothed before fleeing." Zara's hands clenched at the lie, but she maintained her passive pose. "How unfortunate," Quentin said. "I will pray for her soul." Frank's gaze returned to Zara, narrowing slightly. "Your Indian doesn't say much." "Walking Star is shy around strangers," Quentin explained smoothly. "She was raised by the Shoshone but has found the path to salvation. She assists me in my missionary work among her people." Frank dismounted suddenly, approaching Zara. She kept her head bowed, heart pounding so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "She looks familiar somehow," Frank said, reaching out to lift her chin. Before his fingers could touch her, Quentin stepped between them. "My apologies, sir, but in her culture, it is inappropriate for a man to touch a woman who is not his wife. I must ask you to respect her customs." For a tense moment, Frank stared at Quentin, clearly irritated by the interference. Zara held her breath, certain that at any moment he would recognize her despite the disguise. Finally, Frank shrugged and stepped back. "No offense meant, Reverend. Just doing my job." "Of course," Quentin said mildly. "Will you and your companions join us for coffee before you continue your search? I would be happy to share what meager provisions we have." It was a bold move, Zara thought. Most guilty parties would be eager to see the men on their way, not invite them to linger. Frank seemed to come to the same conclusion. "Appreciate the offer, but we've got ground to cover before nightfall. Good day to you, Reverend." They watched in tense silence as the 3 riders departed, continuing in the direction from which Quentin and Zara had come. "We need to move," Quentin said the moment the men were out of earshot. "Frank might have bought the disguise, but he's suspicious, and now we know Blackwood's men are searching the trails." They pushed on until well after dark, both too keyed up from the encounter to stop. When they finally made camp, it was in a well-hidden ravine off the main trail, with no fire to give away their position. "He's calling me a thief," Zara said as they ate a cold supper of jerky and hardtack. "That's rich, coming from a man who was planning to steal my land." "It's a clever story," Quentin admitted. "Makes anyone who might help you think twice. And the reward makes it tempting to turn me in regardless." "We'll be more careful from now on," Quentin promised. "No more stopping near the trail, and we should change our disguises at the next town." Zara nodded, then shivered as a cool night breeze whipped through the ravine. Without a fire, the spring night was decidedly chilly. "Here," Quentin said, shrugging out of his coat and draping it around her shoulders. "Can't have you catching cold." What about you? She protested. I've slept in worse conditions, he assured her. During the war, we sometimes went weeks without proper shelter. The coat was warm from his body heat and smelled faintly of pine and leather. Zara pulled it tighter around herself, inexplicably comforted by the scent. You never talk about the war, she observed. Quentin's expression closed off. Not much to tell that hasn't been told 100 times before. Which side were you on? Union. His tone made it clear he didn't want to elaborate, but after a moment he added, I was a sharpshooter. Zara considered what that meant, the precision required, the solitary nature of the role, the burden of taking lives from a distance. It explained something about the man Quentin had become, his self-imposed isolation, his watchfulness. It must have been terrible, she said quietly. It was. He looked at her then, really looked at her as if seeing past the darkened skin and unfamiliar clothes to the woman beneath. What about you, Zara Mitchell? What's your story beyond a failed wedding and a ranch in trouble? The question caught her off guard. I'm not sure I have much of a story. I've spent most of my life on the ranch, never even been to Denver before. Dreams, then. What did you want before all this happened? Zara thought about it, surprised to realize that no one had asked her that question in a very long time. I wanted to make my father proud, to keep the ranch going, maybe find someone to share it with someday. She laughed softly. Simple dreams, I suppose. The best kind, Quentin said. Sometimes I think we get into trouble when our dreams get too complicated. What about your dreams? Before the war, before Blackwood took your ranch. He was quiet for so long that Zara thought he might not answer. I wanted what most men want, I reckon, land of my own, a family, peace. The last word seemed to hold special weight. After the war, peace was the only one that really mattered. And now? Now? He looked up at the stars just visible between the ravine walls. Now I'm not sure what I want anymore, except to get you safely to Denver. Zara wanted to press further, to understand what lay behind the sadness in his eyes, but something in his posture told her he had shared as much as he was willing to. Instead, she said, Thank you, Quentin, for everything. He nodded once, acknowledging her gratitude without meeting her eyes. Get some sleep, Zara. I'll take first watch. The next morning dawned clear and cold. They set out early, avoiding the main trail as Quentin had suggested. The going was slower on the rough terrain, but they saw no other travelers, which Zara counted as a blessing. By midday, they had reached the outskirts of a small settlement called Red Rock, according to Quentin. We need supplies, he said, studying the town from a distance, and I'm thinking we should change our approach. Different disguises? Zara asked. Yes, but more than that. We need to travel faster. A wagon is too slow and too visible. He turned to her. How do you feel about riding in a stagecoach? A stagecoach? Won't that be more dangerous? More people to recognize me? Yes, but it's also faster, and we'll be hiding in plain sight. The last place Blackwood's men will look for you is on a public stagecoach. He explained his plan. They would abandon the wagon, purchase new clothes and tickets on the Denver-bound stage, and travel as a married couple from San Francisco. Married? Zara echoed, her cheeks warming. It provides a reason for us to stay close without raising eyebrows, Quentin explained, not meeting her eyes, and a wedding ring tends to discourage unwanted attention from other passengers. It made sense, Zara had to admit, and yet the idea of pretending to be Quentin's wife sent a strange flutter through her stomach that had nothing to do with fear. In Red Rock, they sold the wagon and horses to a livery stable owner who asked no questions beyond their asking price. With the money, Quentin purchased new clothes for both of them, a modest traveling dress and bonnet for Zara that would hide her face without drawing attention, and a businessman's suit for himself. At a jeweler's shop, he bought a simple gold band that Zara tried not to think too much about as he slipped it onto her finger. Mrs. Quinn Adams, he said as they left the shop, using the alias he had chosen for them. Recently married in San Francisco and traveling to Denver to visit your ailing mother. And you're a banker, Zara added, remembering their cover story. Opening a new branch in Denver. Exactly. He looked her over, his expression softening. You look different, without the disguise. Self-consciously, Zara touched the bonnet that now framed her face. The walnut stain had been scrubbed from her skin, and her own hair was arranged in a simple style beneath the hat. Good different, or bad different? Just different, he said, but something in his eyes made her breath catch. We should go. The stage leaves in an hour. The stagecoach was crowded with 6 passengers in addition to Zara and Quentin. As they settled onto the hard bench, Quentin's thigh pressed against hers, warm and solid. He played his role with surprising skill, solicitously helping her with her bags, keeping a proprietary hand at the small of her back, addressing her as "my dear," with a conviction that almost made Zara believe they were truly married. Their fellow passengers included an elderly couple returning to Denver after visiting their son in California, a nervous-looking young man clutching a briefcase to his chest, and a well-dressed woman traveling with her teenage daughter. None of them paid much attention to the newlyweds beyond polite introductions. As the stagecoach lurched into motion, Quentin's arms settled around Zara's shoulders, a protective gesture that felt startlingly right. She leaned into him, playing her part as the adoring young wife, and tried to ignore the way her heart quickened at his nearness. The journey was uncomfortable, but uneventful. They stopped at way stations to change horses and take brief meals, always staying close to each other, maintaining their charade. At night, they shared rooms at the stage stops, with Quentin insisting on sleeping on the floor, despite Zara's protests. It wouldn't be proper, he said firmly the first night, spreading his blanket beside the narrow bed. We're supposed to be married, Zara pointed out. It would look strange if you didn't share the bed. No one's watching us now, he replied, his tone making it clear the matter was settled. On the 3rd day of their journey, as the stage rattled along a particularly rough stretch of road, the elderly woman seated across from them leaned forward with a conspiratorial smile. How long have you two been married? She asked. You have that newlywed glow about you. Zara felt herself blush. Just 3 weeks, she replied, sticking to their story. I thought as much, the woman said, nodding. My Harold and I have been married 52 years, and I still remember our early days like they were yesterday. She patted her sleeping husband's hand affectionately. You hold on to that feeling, dear. The years go by faster than you think. I'll remember that, Zara said, suddenly aware of Quentin's gaze on her. When she glanced at him, the intensity in his eyes made her wonder if he was still playing a role, or if something real had begun to take shape between them. That night, at a small way station where they were required to share a cramped room with the elderly couple, Quentin had no choice but to share the bed with Zara, though he maintained a careful distance between them, lying rigid as a board at the edge of the mattress. Quentin, Zara whispered, mindful of their roommate's gentle snores from the other bed. Are you awake? Yes, came his equally quiet reply. Do you think we'll make it to Denver without being discovered? He was silent for a moment. I believe so. We've been lucky so far. And then what? She asked, voicing the question that had been gnawing at her. What happens when we reach Denver? In the darkness, she felt rather than saw him turn toward her. You'll be safe there. You can start a new life. Alone, she whispered. His silence was answer enough. It doesn't have to be that way, Zara said, gathering her courage. You could stay, in Denver, with me. She held her breath, waiting for his response. When it came, his voice was so low she had to strain to hear it. Zara, I'm not the man you think I am. I've done things, during the war and after, things I can't take back. I don't need you to be perfect, she replied. She stopped, unsure how to articulate the feelings that had been growing inside her since that moment behind the church. You just what? He prompted when she didn't continue. I just don't want to lose you, she admitted finally. Is that so terrible? In the dim light filtering through the thin curtains, she could just make out his profile as he stared at the ceiling. No, he said after a long pause. It's not terrible at all. He said nothing more, and eventually Zara drifted into an uneasy sleep, wondering if she had said too much or not enough. The next day passed in a blur of dusty roads and brief stops. Quentin was quieter than usual, though he maintained their cover story flawlessly. By nightfall, they had reached the last stage stop before Denver, a larger settlement with a proper hotel where they were given a private room. Once alone, Quentin seemed to relax slightly, removing his jacket and loosening his tie. "One more day," he said, gazing out the window at the gathering dusk. "By this time tomorrow you'll be in Denver." Zara sat on the edge of the bed watching him. "What will you do after you leave me in Denver?" He turned to face her, his expression troubled. "I haven't decided yet." "Last night," she began hesitantly, "I meant what I said about not wanting to lose you." Quentin crossed the room to sit beside her on the bed, though he maintained a careful distance. "Zara, when I found you behind that church, I had no idea how much my life was about to change. These past days with you." He trailed off, seeming to struggle for words. "What, Quentin?" she urged gently. "They've been the first time in years I've felt alive, like there might be something worth hoping for again." He looked at her then, his gray eyes full of an emotion she couldn't quite name. "But I'm afraid." "Of what?" "Of caring too much. Of losing you anyway." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Of not being the man you deserve." Zara reached for his hand, entwining her fingers with his. "Shouldn't that be for me to decide?" He stared at their joined hands. "You hardly know me." "I know enough," she said firmly. "I know you risked your life for a stranger. I know you're honorable and kind. I know you make me feel safe in a way I've never felt before." Quentin's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, sending shivers up her arm. "And what if Lawrence finds us? What if he never stops looking?" "Then we'll face him together," Zara said, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. "I'm tired of running, Quentin. Tired of letting fear rule my life." Something shifted in his expression, a resolution forming. "There might be a way to end this, to make sure Blackwood can't hurt you or anyone else again." "What do you mean?" "I've been thinking about it since we left Red Rock. Blackwood's power comes from fear and money. If we could take one or both away—" "How?" Quentin stood, pacing the small room. "I still have friends in the territory, people who've suffered under Blackwood's rule but were too afraid to stand against him alone. What if we gathered evidence of his crimes, the fraudulent land deals, the disappeared wives, all of it?" Zara felt a spark of hope ignite within her. "You think people would testify against him?" "With the right assurances, yes. And I know a federal marshal in Denver who can't be bought. If we could build a strong enough case—" "We could stop running," Zara finished, the possibility suddenly tangible. "We could reclaim our lives." Quentin knelt before her, taking both her hands in his. "It would be dangerous. Blackwood won't go down without a fight." "I'm not afraid," Zara said, and was surprised to realize it was true. With Quentin beside her, she felt capable of facing anything. "Not anymore." The look he gave her then was so full of admiration and something deeper that it took her breath away. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle kiss that held both question and promise. When he drew back, Zara followed, her hands moving to frame his face as she kissed him again, this time with all the feelings she'd been holding back. Quentin responded with equal fervor, his arms encircling her waist, drawing her closer until she was practically in his lap. "Zara," he murmured against her lips, his voice rough with emotion, "are you sure about this? About me?" In answer, she kissed him again, pouring into it all her certainty, all her newfound courage. When they finally parted, both breathless, she rested her forehead against his. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." That night, they planned their strategy for confronting Lawrence Blackwood. They would continue to Denver as scheduled, meet with Marshal James Wilson, and begin building their case. Quentin would reach out to his network of contacts, gathering testimonies and evidence. Zara would remain in Denver under the marshal's protection until it was safe to return to the territory. As they talked, a new sense of purpose replaced the fear that had driven them since their flight from Silver Creek. For the first time, Zara allowed herself to imagine a future beyond mere survival, a future that might include Quentin Hayes. They reached Denver the next afternoon, the bustling city a stark contrast to the small towns and wilderness they had traveled through. Tall buildings lined the streets, and people of all descriptions hurried about their business. After the confined space of the stagecoach, the noise and crowds were overwhelming. Quentin secured rooms for them at a respectable hotel under their assumed names, explaining they would maintain their cover until they'd spoken with the marshal. "No sense taking unnecessary risks," he said as he escorted Zara to her room, adjacent to his own. "When will we meet this Marshal Wilson?" she asked, removing her bonnet and running a hand through her hair, relieved to be free of the disguise at last. "I sent a message from the last stage stop. If all goes well, he'll meet us here this evening." Quentin hesitated at the door. "You should rest. It's been a long journey." Zara caught his hand before he could leave. "Quentin," he turned back, his eyes questioning. "Thank you," she said simply, "for believing in me, for helping me find my courage again." His expression softened, and he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Your courage was always there, Zara. I just reminded you where to look for it." After he left, Zara sank onto the bed, her mind whirling with all that had happened since that fateful day behind the church. She had fled from a loveless marriage, arranged out of desperation, only to find something she hadn't known she was seeking. A man who saw her strength rather than her vulnerability, who valued her determination rather than her obedience. A knock at the connecting door roused her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Quentin, his expression grim. "What is it?" she asked, alarm rising. "Marshal Wilson is here," he said, "and he's brought news. Lawrence Blackwood arrived in Denver yesterday." Zara felt the blood drain from her face. "Here. How did he know?" "He didn't, according to Wilson. He's here on business with the railroad, but it means we need to be extremely careful. If he sees either of us, he'll kill us both," Zara finished. Quentin nodded grimly. "Wilson is waiting downstairs. He says he has a safe house where you can stay while we build our case." "Not without you," Zara said firmly. "We stay together." "Zara." "No," she interrupted. "We've come this far together. I won't be separated from you now, especially not with Lawrence in the city." For a moment it seemed Quentin might argue, but then his expression softened. "All right, together then." Marshal James Wilson was a tall, stern-faced man with a silver star pinned to his vest and eyes that missed nothing. He listened without interruption as Quentin and Zara explained their situation, from Lawrence's fraudulent land deals to his history of abusive marriages and mysterious widowhoods. "This isn't the first time Blackwood's name has crossed my desk," Wilson said when they'd finished. "But he's always been careful to keep his operations just within the bounds of the law, or at least to eliminate any witnesses who might testify otherwise." "This time he's made a mistake," Quentin said. "Zara is alive and willing to testify, and I believe others will come forward if they know they'll be protected." Wilson stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "It won't be easy. Blackwood has friends in high places, even here in Denver." "But not impossible," Zara pressed. "No, not impossible." The marshal eyed her with newfound respect. "You're a brave woman, Mrs. Mitchell." "Just determined," she replied. "Lawrence Blackwood has hurt too many people. It's time someone stood up to him." "I agree," Wilson said, coming to a decision. "Here's what we'll do. I have a property on the outskirts of town, a small farmhouse that the department uses occasionally to house witnesses. You'll both stay there while we build our case. Blackwood doesn't know I'm involved, so there's no reason for him to connect that location to either of you." "And then?" Quentin asked. "Once we have enough evidence, I'll obtain a federal warrant for Blackwood's arrest. Given the serious nature of the charges and his history of violence, I'll assemble a team of deputies to take him into custody." Wilson's grim expression suggested he anticipated resistance. But until then, you both need to remain completely out of sight. Understood? They agreed readily, and within the hour were following Wilson's directions to the safe house, traveling in a closed carriage with the curtains drawn. The property was modest but well maintained, set back from the road and surrounded by a stand of cottonwood trees that provided natural screening. "It's not fancy," Wilson apologized as he showed them around the small house. "But it's secure. No one knows this property is connected to the marshal's office." "It's perfect," Zara assured him, taking in the simple furnishings and well-stocked pantry. After days on the trail and in stagecoaches, the prospect of a real bed and home-cooked meals seemed luxurious. Wilson left them with instructions to remain on the property at all times and a promise to return the following day with news. As the sound of his horse's hooves faded into the distance, Zara and Quentin found themselves truly alone for the first time since their journey began. "Well," Quentin said, looking around the cozy main room with its stone fireplace and worn but comfortable furniture, "I guess we wait." Zara moved to the window, peering through the curtains at the lengthening shadows of evening. "It feels strange, doesn't it? To stop running suddenly." "Yes," he agreed, coming to stand beside her, "like the moment after a storm passes when everything is still." She turned to face him, studying the lines of his face, the stubble that shadowed his jaw, the way his dark hair curled slightly at his collar. "Are you sorry? About any of this?" His eyes met hers, clear and steady. "Not for a moment. Are you?" "No," she said softly, "though I do regret the danger I have brought into your life." Quentin shook his head, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her face. "Zara, my life was empty before you crashed into it. Danger seems a small price to pay for finding you." The simple honesty of his words brought tears to her eyes. "I never expected this," she whispered. "When I ran from that church, I thought I was running toward loneliness, toward a life spent looking over my shoulder. Instead, I found you." "And I found you," he replied, drawing her into his arms, against all odds in the most unlikely place. Their kiss was different this time, unhurried, deep, filled with a promise that neither of them put into words, but both felt in their bones. When they finally parted, Zara rested her head against Quentin's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "What happens after?" she asked. "If we succeed in bringing Lawrence to justice?" Quentin's hand stroked gently through her hair. "What do you want to happen?" She looked up at him, allowing herself to voice the dream that had been forming in her heart. "I want to go home, to my father's ranch, to rebuild what was lost." She hesitated, then added, "With you, if you're willing." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I can think of nothing I want more." The days that followed settled into a strange, suspended rhythm. They remained in the safe house as instructed, passing the time cooking together, talking for hours, and occasionally helping Wilson with his investigation by writing detailed statements about their experiences with Lawrence Blackwood. To Zara's surprise, she found herself enjoying this unexpected respite. After the fear and constant movement of their journey, the simple domesticity of sharing a home with Quentin even temporarily felt like a glimpse into the future they might build together. On their fourth day at the safe house, Wilson arrived with encouraging news. "We've located 2 of Blackwood's former employees who are willing to testify about land fraud and intimidation tactics," he reported as they sat around the kitchen table, "and I've sent inquiries to the hometowns of his previous wives. If we can establish a pattern of suspicious deaths—" "What about his current activities in Denver?" Quentin asked. "Any idea how long he plans to stay?" Wilson's expression grew serious. "That's the other reason I came today. Blackwood has been meeting with railroad executives and city officials. From what my sources tell me, he's negotiating a major land deal selling off large portions of his holdings in the territory including, I believe, your father's ranch, Mrs. Mitchell." Zara felt a pang of grief at the thought of her family's land being carved up for railroad tracks. "Can we stop him?" "If the sale hasn't been finalized, and if we can move quickly enough with our case, yes," Wilson said. "But we need to be thorough. Blackwood has enough money to hire the best lawyers in the territory. If our evidence isn't rock solid, he'll walk free and be more dangerous than ever." "How much more time do you need?" Quentin asked. "A week, maybe 2. We're making progress, but these things can't be rushed." Wilson stood, preparing to leave. "In the meantime, stay put. Blackwood has increased the reward for Mrs. Mitchell's return, and he's hired additional men to search for her." After the marshal departed, Zara found herself restless, pacing the small house like a caged animal. "I hate this waiting," she said as Quentin watched her from his seat by the fire. "Knowing he's out there, selling my father's land while we hide." "I know," Quentin said gently. "But Wilson is right. We need to be patient." "Patient," Zara repeated, the word bitter on her tongue. "I've been patient my whole life, Quentin. Patient while my father made bad decisions that cost us everything. Patient while Lawrence manipulated and lied. And where has it gotten me?" Quentin rose, crossing the room to take her hands in his. "It got you here," he said simply. "To this moment, to me." The anger drained out of her as quickly as it had come. "You're right," she admitted, "and I am grateful. It's just," she trailed off, struggling to articulate her feelings. "Just what?" he prompted. "I want to start our life together," she said finally. "Our real life, not this limbo. I want to go home, rebuild the ranch, wake up beside you without fear hanging over us." Quentin's eyes darkened at her words, and he pulled her close. "We will," he promised, "soon." That night, as they lay together in the small bedroom they had come to share, Quentin's arms wrapped securely around her, Zara found herself thinking of her father. What would Alexander Mitchell think of the man she had chosen? A man who had lost his own ranch but still believed in second chances, who carried the scars of war but had somehow kept his capacity for tenderness intact. "He would have liked you," she murmured, half to herself. "Hmm?" Quentin's voice was drowsy against her hair. "My father. He would have approved of you." Quentin was quiet for a moment. "I hope so," he said finally. "I never had the chance to ask his permission to court his daughter." Zara smiled in the darkness. "He was old-fashioned that way. He always said he'd run off any man who wasn't worthy of me." "And am I?" Quentin asked, suddenly serious. "Worthy of you?" She turned in his arms to face him, though she could barely make out his features in the dim light. "More than worthy," she said firmly. "You're everything I never knew I needed, Quentin Hayes." His kiss was tender, a ceiling of promises still unspoken, but growing stronger with each passing day. The next morning, Zara woke to find Quentin already up, a troubled expression on his face as he stood by the window, peering through the curtains. "What is it?" she asked, instantly alert. "Probably nothing," he said, but the tension in his shoulders belied his casual tone. "I thought I saw someone at the edge of the property earlier, but they're gone now." "One of Wilson's men?" "Maybe." He didn't sound convinced. "Stay inside today, all right? Keep away from the windows." The day passed with an undercurrent of unease. Quentin checked and rechecked the doors and windows, kept his gun within reach, and startled at every unexpected sound. By evening, Zara's nerves were as taut as piano wire. "You think Lawrence's men have found us," she said as they ate a simple supper, stating it as fact rather than question. Quentin hesitated, then nodded. "I can't be certain, but yes, I'm concerned. Should we leave? Find somewhere else to hide? And risk being seen? No, I think we're safer here for now." He reached across the table to squeeze her hand reassuringly. "Wilson will be back tomorrow. We'll tell him our concerns then." But Marshal Wilson didn't come the next day, or the day after. By the third day with no word, Quentin's worry had turned to grim determination. "Something's wrong," he said as he paced the main room. "Wilson wouldn't leave us this long without communication, unless something had happened." You think Lawrence got to him? Zara asked, fear clutching at her throat. I don't know, but I'm not willing to sit here waiting to find out. He began gathering their few possessions. We need to move. Find somewhere else to hole up until we can determine what's happened. Where will we go? Quentin paused, considering. I have a friend in Denver, an old war buddy. He owns a saloon in a part of town Blackwood is unlikely to frequent. We'll go there, send a message to Wilson, and make our next plan. They left at dusk, taking only what they could carry, and made their way cautiously toward the city. Quentin had located a map in the safe house and plotted a route that avoided main roads and open areas. Still, every shadow, every snapping twig, sent Zara's heart racing. They had been walking for nearly an hour when Quentin suddenly froze, his hand flying up in a signal for silence. Zara stood perfectly still, straining her ears. At first, she heard nothing, but then the soft sound of hooves on dirt, approaching slowly. Run, Quentin whispered, pushing her toward a dense stand of trees. Don't stop until you reach the city. Find the Silver Dollar Saloon and ask for Jack Byrne. Tell him Quentin sent you. I'm not leaving you, Zara protested. You have to, he insisted, his voice urgent but quiet. I'll draw them off, then circle back to meet you. But if something happens to me, you need to get to Jack. He'll help you. Before she could argue further, he pressed a quick, hard kiss to her lips. Go now. Torn between fear and the desperate need to stay with him, Zara hesitated only a moment longer before slipping into the trees. She ran as quietly as she could, her heart pounding in her ears, fighting the urge to look back. Behind her, she heard Quentin's voice calling out, deliberately drawing attention to himself, away from her path. Then came the sound she dreaded most. Gunshots, 2 in rapid succession, followed by shouts. Zara stumbled, nearly falling, but forced herself to keep moving. Quentin had given her a chance. She couldn't waste it. The lights of Denver appeared ahead, a constellation of yellow windows and street lamps. Zara slowed to a walk as she reached the outskirts, trying to appear casual despite her disheveled appearance and the fear that must have been written across her face. The Silver Dollar Saloon was in a rough part of town, the kind of place Zara would never have entered in her previous life. But circumstances had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. Drawing a deep breath, she pushed through the swinging doors into the smoky interior. The saloon was crowded, filled with miners, cowboys, and other hard-looking men seeking respite from their labors. Conversations faltered briefly as heads turned to observe the unexpected arrival of a woman alone, but quickly resumed when nothing more interesting transpired. Zara made her way to the bar where a barrel-chested man with an impressive mustache was serving drinks. "Excuse me," she said, pitching her voice to be heard over the piano player in the corner. "I'm looking for Jack Byrne." The bartender looked her over suspiciously. "Who's asking?" "A friend of Quentin Hayes," she replied, leaning closer. "It's urgent." Something shifted in the man's expression. "Wait here," he said, gesturing to a stool at the end of the bar. Minutes later, a door behind the bar opened and a tall man with a shock of red hair and a patch over one eye emerged. He beckoned to Zara, and the bartender lifted a section of the counter to let her through. "You're Hayes' friend?" the man asked once they were in a small office away from the noise of the saloon. "Yes," Zara said. "Are you Jack Byrne?" He nodded. "Where's Quentin?" Quickly, Zara explained their situation, ending with their escape from the safe house and the gunshots she'd heard as they separated. "He told me to find you if something happened to him." Jack's expression grew grave. "That sounds like Quentin, always ready to sacrifice himself." He poured a generous measure of whiskey into a glass and handed it to Zara. "Drink this. You look like you need it." She accepted the glass but set it aside untasted. "We need to find him." "We will," Jack assured her. "But first, let's get you somewhere safe. If Blackwood's men are searching for you, this is the first place they'll come once they realize you and Quentin have separated." He led her through a back door and across a small courtyard to a narrow staircase that ascended to a second-floor apartment. "My place," he explained, unlocking the door. "You'll be safe here while I gather some men and go look for Quentin." "I want to come with you," Zara insisted. Jack shook his head firmly. Not a chance. Quentin would have my other eye if I put you in danger. Reluctantly, Zara agreed to stay behind. But as soon as Jack left, she began pacing the small apartment, her mind racing with terrible possibilities. What if Quentin was hurt? What if Lawrence's men had captured him? Or worse? Hours passed with excruciating slowness. Zara tried to rest but found sleep impossible. Every creak of the building, every shout from the street below sent her heart hammering. By dawn, she was nearly frantic with worry. When the door finally opened, she leapt to her feet, hope and dread warring within her. Jack entered first, followed by two men supporting a third between them. Quentin, his face bloody, one arm hanging limp at his side. "Quentin!" Zara rushed forward as the men helped him to a threadbare sofa. Despite his obvious pain, Quentin's face lit up at the sight of her. "You made it," he said, his voice rough. "Thanks to you," she replied, kneeling beside him, her hands hovering uncertainly over his injuries. "What happened?" "Blackwood's men," he said grimly. "They were waiting for us. I led them on a merry chase, but one of them got lucky." He gestured to his left shoulder, where his shirt was dark with blood. "He's been shot," Jack explained unnecessarily. "Clean through, fortunately. No bullet to dig out." "We need a doctor," Zara insisted. Jack shook his head. "Too risky. Blackwood has eyes everywhere, and a gunshot wound would raise questions. I've sent for a woman who helps out in these situations. She'll be here soon." True to his word, within the hour, a stern-faced woman arrived with a black bag full of medical supplies. She worked efficiently, cleaning and bandaging Quentin's wound, setting his dislocated shoulder, and leaving strict instructions for his care. "He needs rest," she told Zara before departing, "and plenty of it. That shoulder will heal, but not if he insists on getting himself shot at again." Once they were alone, Zara sat beside Quentin on the sofa, gently stroking his hair back from his forehead. "You scared me half to death," she said softly. "I'm sorry," he replied, catching her hand and pressing it to his lips. "I never meant for any of this to happen." "Did you learn anything about what happened to Marshal Wilson?" Quentin's expression darkened. "Nothing concrete, but from what Blackwood's men were saying, I gather Wilson has been removed from the investigation. Someone higher up intervened." "Lawrence's influence," Zara guessed. "Most likely." Quentin shifted, wincing as the movement jarred his injured shoulder. "But Jack's been making inquiries of his own. He thinks not all the evidence Wilson gathered has been suppressed. There might still be a chance to bring Blackwood to justice." "But not if we're dead," Zara pointed out. "And now Lawrence knows we're in Denver." "Yes," Quentin agreed grimly. "Which means we need a new plan." They spent the next 2 days in Jack's apartment, rarely venturing out even into the saloon below. Jack brought news from the city. Lawrence Blackwood had indeed succeeded in selling large portions of his territory holdings to the railroad, including the Mitchell Ranch. The sale had made headlines in the Denver papers, with Blackwood portrayed as a visionary businessman bringing progress to the frontier. "There's more," Jack said on the evening of the second day, his expression unusually somber. "Blackwood's announced his engagement to a local girl, daughter of one of the city councilmen." Zara felt sick at the news. Another young woman being sacrificed to his ambitions. "He works fast," Quentin observed, his voice hard. "The wedding is set for the end of the month." "We can't let it happen," Zara said firmly. "We can't let another woman suffer what his previous wives endured." Quentin looked at her, something like pride mingling with concern in his eyes. "What are you suggesting?" "That we stop hiding and start fighting back," she replied. "Lawrence thinks he's won. He believes I'm either dead or too frightened to challenge him. We need to use that against him." A slow smile spread across Quentin's face. "You know, for someone who was hiding behind a church when I met her, you've developed quite a taste for confrontation, Miss Mitchell." "I had a good teacher," she replied, returning his smile. Over the next several days, with Jack's help and Quentin's strategic mind, they formulated a plan. While Blackwood was occupied with his business dealings and wedding preparations, they would gather the evidence Wilson had been collecting, reach out to those who had been willing to testify, and build their case independently. Then, at the moment of Blackwood's greatest triumph, his wedding day, they would strike. "It's risky," Quentin cautioned. "If we fail, there won't be another chance." "I know," Zara said, "but I can't live looking over my shoulder forever, and I can't stand by while another woman becomes his victim." As Quentin's strength returned, they began to implement their plan. Jack's connections in Denver proved invaluable, providing information on Blackwood's movements and access to people who might help their cause. To their surprise, one of Wilson's deputies secretly contacted them, offering the files the marshal had been forced to abandon. "Wilson sent me," the young man explained nervously when they met in a quiet corner of Jack's saloon. "He's been reassigned to a post in Montana, but he wanted you to have these." He handed over a thick packet of documents. "He says to be careful. Blackwood has friends in high places." The files contained testimonies from Lawrence's former employees, correspondence that hinted at fraudulent land deals, and most damning of all, medical reports on the deaths of his previous wives that suggested patterns inconsistent with the official causes of death. "It's not enough for a conviction," Quentin said as they reviewed the materials, "but it's enough to raise serious questions. If we can get this in front of the right people." "The newspaper," Jack suggested. "I know a reporter at the Denver Post who hates Blackwood's kind of wealthy influence peddler. He'd run the story if we can verify the key points." "And the wedding?" Zara asked. "What about stopping that?" Quentin's eyes met hers across the table. "That," he said, "is where you come in." The plan they developed was audacious. While Jack worked with his reporter friend to prepare an expose on Blackwood's criminal activities, Quentin would gather the witnesses willing to testify and bring them to Denver. And Zara would confront Lawrence directly at the society ball being held the night before his wedding. "It's too dangerous," Quentin argued when she first suggested it. "He'll kill you on sight." "Not in a room full of Denver's elite," Zara countered. "His entire success depends on his respectable image. He won't risk that. Not publicly." "And if he gets you alone?" Zara patted the small derringer she kept in her pocket. "I won't let that happen. Besides, you'll be there too, watching from the shadows." Quentin looked unconvinced, but eventually conceded that they needed a public confrontation to lend credibility to the newspaper story that would follow. "But at the first sign of real danger, we leave," he insisted. "Promise me, Zara." "I promise," she said, though in her heart she knew she would do whatever was necessary to stop Lawrence Blackwood once and for all. The night of the ball arrived clear and cold, stars shining like diamonds in the black velvet sky above Denver. Zara stood before the mirror in a borrowed gown of deep blue silk, her hair arranged in an elegant style by the wife of one of Jack's employees. She hardly recognized herself. The frightened bride who had fled Silver Creek seemed like a stranger now. "You look beautiful," Quentin said from the doorway, his own appearance transformed by a well-tailored suit Jack had procured for him. Despite the formal attire, he still wore his gun, concealed beneath his jacket. "And you look very handsome," Zara replied, crossing the room to straighten his tie. "Are you sure you're well enough for this? Your shoulder is healing fine," he finished for her. "Stop worrying about me. It's yourself you should be concerned with." "I'm not afraid," she said, and meant it. "Not with you beside me." His expression softened, and he leaned down to kiss her gently. "Always," he promised, "though tonight I'll be watching from a distance. Remember the plan. You enter alone, make your presence known, and leave before Blackwood can retaliate. I'll be outside with the carriage. And tomorrow? Tomorrow the Post runs their story, complete with sworn testimonies and evidence. By noon, Blackwood will be fighting for his reputation instead of getting married." His smile held grim satisfaction. "And with luck, by evening, he'll be in custody." They traveled to the Denham Hotel where the ball was being held, Zara's stomach fluttering with nerves that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with determination. As planned, Quentin led her out a block away, continuing with the carriage to wait at their predetermined meeting spot. The hotel lobby was crowded with Denver's finest, ladies in elaborate gowns escorted by gentlemen in formal attire. Zara moved through them with her head held high, ignoring the curious glances her unaccompanied state attracted. At the entrance to the ballroom, she presented the invitation Jack had somehow procured. The ballroom itself was a blaze of light and color, crystal chandeliers reflecting off jewels and polished silver, the orchestra playing a lively waltz as couples swept across the dance floor. Zara scanned the crowd, her pulse quickening as she spotted Lawrence Blackwood near the center of the room, a glass of champagne in his hand, laughing with a group of well-dressed men. Beside him stood a young woman, hardly more than a girl, really with a nervous smile and eyes that darted frequently to Lawrence's face as if seeking approval. His fiancée, Zara realized with a pang of sympathy. So young, so unaware of the fate that awaited her. Taking a deep breath, Zara moved forward, weaving through the crowd until she stood directly in Lawrence's line of sight. When his eyes finally landed on her, the shock that registered on his face was everything she had hoped for, a moment of complete disbelief, followed by naked fury, quickly masked behind a veneer of composure. "Excuse me, gentlemen," she heard him say to his companions. "I see someone I must greet." As he approached, Zara stood her ground, refusing to show any sign of the loathing she felt for this man who had nearly destroyed her life. "Zara," Lawrence said when he reached her, his voice pitched low but vibrating with barely controlled rage. "What an unexpected surprise. I thought you were dead." "Disappointed?" she replied coolly. "I'm sure you would have preferred that outcome." His smile was cold as ice. "What do you want? Money? Is that why you've come? To blackmail me on the eve of my wedding?" "I want justice," Zara said simply. "For myself, for your previous wives, for all the people you've cheated and intimidated over the years." Lawrence laughed, though his eyes remained hard. "Justice? My dear, justice belongs to those who can afford it, and I can afford the very best that money can buy." "Not this time," Zara said, drawing strength from the knowledge that even as they spoke, Jack was delivering the final evidence to his reporter friend. "This time, your money won't save you." Something in her tone must have convinced him she was serious, because the amusement vanished from his face, replaced by calculation. "Come with me," he said, taking her elbow in a grip that appeared gentlemanly but was painfully tight. "Let's discuss this somewhere private." "I don't think so," Zara replied, pulling away from his grasp. "In fact, I've said all I came to say. Enjoy your evening, Lawrence. It may be your last as a free man." She turned to leave, but Lawrence's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist and jerking her back toward him. "You little fool," he hissed. "Do you have any idea who you're dealing with, what I'm capable of?" "Let go of me," Zara said clearly, loud enough that nearby guests turned to look. "You're making a scene, Lawrence." Aware of the attention they were attracting, he released her, though his eyes promised retribution. "This isn't over," he warned, "not by a long shot." "No," Zara agreed. "It's just beginning." With that, she walked away, back straight, head high, ignoring the whispers that followed her exit. She had done what she came to do, let Lawrence know that she was alive, that she was not afraid, and that his reckoning was at hand. Outside, she found Quentin waiting anxiously with the carriage. "You're pale," he observed as he helped her inside. "What happened?" As they drove away from the hotel, Zara recounted her brief confrontation with Lawrence. "He was angry," she concluded, "but also worried, I think. He knows something is coming." "Good," Quentin said grimly. "Let him worry. By this time tomorrow he'll have much more to worry about than a ruined wedding." They returned to the apartment above Jack's saloon to find Jack himself waiting with news. "It's done," he told them. "The story runs in the morning edition, and I've heard from 3 of the witnesses they're in town, ready to come forward publicly once the article appears." "And the marshal's office?" Quentin asked. "My contact there says they're watching the situation closely. If the evidence is as strong as we believe, they'll move quickly to arrest Blackwood before he can flee." That night, despite the tension of anticipation, Zara slept more soundly than she had in weeks. The confrontation with Lawrence had been cathartic, liberating. For too long, he had loomed in her nightmares as an almost mythical figure of menace. Seeing him in person, watching him struggle to maintain his composure in the face of her defiance, had diminished him somehow. He was just a man after all, a dangerous man, yes, but not invincible. Morning brought with it the promised newspaper article. Splashed across the front page of the Denver Post, "Cattle Baron's Empire Built on Fraud and Murder," read the headline, followed by a detailed account of Lawrence Blackwood's alleged crimes, complete with testimony from former employees and disturbing questions about the deaths of his previous wives. "It's excellent," Quentin said as they read the article together over coffee. "Thorough, well-documented, impossible to dismiss as mere gossip." "What do you think Lawrence will do?" Zara asked. "Run, if he has any sense," Jack opined from his position by the window, where he'd been keeping watch on the street below. But men like Blackwood rarely do the sensible thing when their pride is wounded. Jack's assessment proved accurate. By midday, word reached them through Jack's network of informants that Lawrence had been seen storming into the offices of the Denver Post, demanding a retraction and threatening lawsuits. When that failed, he had returned to the Denham Hotel, where, according to hotel staff, he had been drinking heavily while his terrified fiancée and her family made hasty preparations to leave the city. "The marshal's office is moving cautiously," Jack reported after another of his sources checked in. "They're gathering additional evidence before making an arrest. Blackwood still has friends in high places." "We need to be careful," Quentin warned. "A wounded animal is at its most dangerous." As evening approached, they received word that Lawrence had left the hotel, destination unknown. "Stay here," Jack advised. "Keep the doors locked. I'll post men downstairs to watch for trouble." But trouble, when it came, didn't approach from the street. It was just past midnight when Zara woke to the smell of smoke. Beside her, Quentin was already alert, pulling on his boots. "Fire," he said tersely. "Get dressed quickly." They had barely finished dressing when Jack burst through the door, his face grim. "Blackwood's men," he said without preamble. "They've set the saloon on fire. We need to go now." Smoke was already seeping under the door as they followed Jack down a narrow back staircase that Zara hadn't known existed. Behind them, flames were visible through the windows of the apartment they had just left. "This way," Jack urged, leading them through a series of alleyways behind the buildings. "I have horses waiting 2 blocks over." They had almost reached the end of the current alley when a figure stepped out of the shadows ahead, blocking their path. Lawrence Blackwood, his elegant evening clothes disheveled, a gun in his hand. "Did you really think I wouldn't find you?" he asked, his voice slurred but his aim steady. "Did you think you could ruin me and simply walk away?" Quentin pushed Zara behind him, his own gun already drawn. "It's over, Blackwood. The authorities are looking for you." "You've lost," Lawrence laughed, a hollow sound devoid of humor. "If I've lost everything, then I have nothing left to lose, do I?" His eyes, fever bright in the dim light, fixed on Zara. "She's coming with me. My wedding may be canceled, but I won't leave empty-handed." "Not a chance," Quentin said, his voice cold with resolve. "Then I'll kill you all," Lawrence replied simply, raising his gun. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Quentin fired first, his bullet catching Lawrence in the shoulder, spinning him halfway around. But even as he fell, Lawrence's gun discharged, the bullet striking Jack in the chest. Then more shots from the darkness behind them, Lawrence's men closing in. "Run!" Jack gasped, clutching his wound. "I'll hold them off!" "We're not leaving you!" Quentin insisted, firing again into the darkness where movement betrayed the positions of Lawrence's hired guns. "Go!" Jack ordered, shoving Quentin toward a narrow gap between buildings. "There's no time!" With anguished reluctance, Quentin grabbed Zara's hand and pulled her through the gap, bullets splintering the wood around them as they ran. Behind them, they heard Jack return fire, then a volley of shots followed by silence. They emerged onto a quieter street still running, Quentin leading the way to where Jack had said horses would be waiting. To Zara's relief, they found 2 saddled mounts tethered to a hitching post behind a closed general store. "Where are we going?" she asked as Quentin helped her into the saddle. "Out of the city," he replied grimly. "Blackwood's wounded but alive, and he'll have men watching every road. Jack would want us to keep moving," Quentin finished, though his expression revealed the pain he felt at leaving his friend behind. They rode hard through the night, avoiding main roads and keeping to the shadows whenever possible. By dawn, they had left Denver far behind, the mountains rising before them as they continued west. "There's a mining town about 20 miles ahead," Quentin said as they paused to rest the horses by a small stream. "Silverton. Jack has had friends there. We can lay low, figure out our next move." Zara nodded, too exhausted for conversation. The events of the past 24 hours felt surreal. The ball, the newspaper article, the fire, Jack's sacrifice, their desperate flight. And Lawrence, wounded but still pursuing them, his obsession now fueled by revenge as well as wounded pride. They reached Silverton by midday, a collection of wooden buildings nestled in a mountain valley, the constant thump of stamp mills providing a backdrop to the everyday activities of the mining community. As Quentin had hoped, Jack's name opened doors, and by evening they had secured lodging with the widow of a miner who asked no questions beyond what Quentin chose to share. For 3 days they remained in Silverton, resting and planning. News from Denver reached them slowly. Lawrence Blackwood had disappeared, possibly fled the territory. Warrants had been issued for his arrest on charges of arson, attempted murder, and fraud. Jack Byrne had survived his wounds and was recovering under guard at a Denver hospital. "He's alive," Zara said, relief flooding through her when Quentin returned with this news. "Thank God." "Jack's too stubborn to die," Quentin agreed, though his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "But Blackwood being in the wind complicates things. We can't go back to Denver, not until he's apprehended." "So what do we do?" Zara asked. "Keep running forever?" Quentin sat beside her on the narrow bed that dominated the room they'd been given. "No," he said firmly. "No more running. I've been thinking. What if we went back?" "Back where?" "To Silver Creek, to your ranch." Zara stared at him in disbelief. "The ranch that Lawrence sold to the railroad? The town where he has the most influence?" "Hear me out," Quentin said, taking her hands in his. "The newspaper articles have changed things. Lawrence's power came from fear and the appearance of respectability. Both are gone now. The people of Silver Creek will have read about his crimes, seen the testimonies of his former employees. And the railroad deal may not be as final as we thought. According to the latest news, the railroad is reconsidering all contracts associated with Blackwood, given the criminal charges against him." Hope, fragile but persistent, bloomed in Zara's chest. "You really think we could go back, reclaim the ranch?" "I think we could try," Quentin said. "Together." The word hung between them, full of promise. Together. After all they had been through, all they had survived, the future Zara had barely dared to imagine seemed suddenly within reach. "Together," she repeated, squeezing his hands. "Yes, I'd like that very much." They left Silverton the next morning, traveling south and east toward the territory they had fled weeks before. The journey was long but peaceful, unmarked by the fear and urgency that had characterized their flight. They took their time, stopping in small settlements along the way, gradually working their way back to Silver Creek. News continued to reach them. More witnesses had come forward against Lawrence Blackwood, bolstering the case against him. The railroad had indeed canceled the land purchases, citing fraud in the contracts. Lawrence himself remained at large, though rumors placed him in Mexico or perhaps Canada. As they neared Silver Creek, Zara found herself both anxious and eager to see her home again. Would the town have changed? Would the people welcome her back or view her with suspicion after all that had happened? "Nervous?" Quentin asked as they crested the final hill overlooking the valley where Silver Creek nestled against the backdrop of distant mountains. "A little," she admitted. "It feels strange coming back like this." "We can still change our minds," he offered. "Head to California instead. Start fresh somewhere new." Zara considered it for a moment, then shook her head. "No, this is home. My father built that ranch from nothing. I want to do the same, to honor his memory by making it thrive again." The smile Quentin gave her was full of pride and something deeper, a love that had grown from the most unlikely beginnings into something unshakable. "Then let's go home," he said. Their reception in Silver Creek was mixed. Some townspeople greeted Zara with genuine warmth, expressing relief at her safe return and outrage at what Lawrence had nearly done. Others were more reserved, uncertain how to react to the woman whose dramatic flight from the altar had inadvertently exposed the crimes of the town's most powerful citizen. The ranch itself was much as Zara had left it, though the weeks of neglect were evident in the overgrown pastures and silent buildings. Standing in the yard, looking up at the house where she had grown up, Zara felt a profound sense of homecoming. "It needs work," Quentin observed, his arm around her waist. "Yes," she agreed, "but it's ours now, really ours." The work of rebuilding began the very next day. Word spread quickly that Zara Mitchell had returned to reclaim her father's ranch, and to everyone's surprise, help began to arrive. Neighboring ranchers sent hands to assist with repairs, townspeople brought food and supplies, and even the bank that had foreclosed on the property in Lawrence's absence now expressed a willingness to negotiate new terms. "People are glad to see Blackwood gone," the bank manager explained when he visited the ranch to discuss financing. "His methods weren't good for business in the long run. Stable, honest ranchers like yourselves, that's what this territory needs." Yourselves. The casual inclusion of Quentin alongside Zara did not go unnoticed by either of them. In the weeks since their return, they had fallen into an easy partnership, working side by side to restore the ranch, making plans for its future, their future. But there was still one step they had not taken, one commitment that remained unspoken between them. It was a clear autumn evening, nearly 3 months after their return to Silver Creek, when Quentin suggested a ride to the creek that gave the town its name. The water was low this time of year, meandering gently through stands of cottonwood trees, now clothed in gold. They dismounted near a familiar bend in the creek, a spot where Zara had often come with her father when she was a child. Quentin spread a blanket on the ground, and they sat together, watching the last light of day paint the sky in shades of pink and purple. "I received a letter from Jack yesterday," Quentin said, breaking the comfortable silence. "He's fully recovered and thinking of selling the saloon." "Oh?" Zara leaned against his shoulder, content in the simple pleasure of his presence. "What will he do instead?" "That's the interesting part," Quentin replied, a smile in his voice. "He's considering moving out this way. Says city life has lost its appeal since the fire." "He'd be welcome," Zara said warmly. "We could use a man with his skills and his friendship." "That's what I told him." Quentin shifted slightly, turning to face her. "I also told him something else. Something I haven't actually discussed with you yet." There was an unfamiliar note in his voice that made Zara sit up straighter. "What is it?" Quentin took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "I told him I was hoping to build a proper home for my wife, that the current ranch house is fine for now, but with a family we'd need more space." "Your wife?" Zara repeated, her heart suddenly racing. "Yes," Quentin said, reaching into his pocket to withdraw a small object that caught the fading light. "A ring, simple but elegant. If she'll have me, that is." Tears blurred Zara's vision as Quentin took her hand, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that took her breath away. "Zara Mitchell," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident on his face. "When I found you hiding behind that church and offered you my hat, I had no idea I was offering you my heart as well. But somewhere between Silver Creek and Denver, between gunfights and disguises and midnight escapes, I fell in love with your courage, your determination, your unfailing kindness." He paused, swallowing hard. "I know I'm not the man your father would have chosen for you. I don't have wealth or position. What I do have is a promise. To stand beside you through whatever life brings, to build something beautiful with you, to love you until my last breath. Will you marry me?" The tears spilled over as Zara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Quentin slipped the ring onto her finger, then gathered her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the words that neither of them needed to say. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Zara found her voice again. "It was always going to be yes," she told him, "from the moment you held out your hat and asked if I was coming with you." Quentin laughed, the sound joyous in the gathering twilight. "And to think if you'd said no that day." "But I didn't," Zara reminded him. "I took your hand and never looked back." They were married in the spring, when wildflowers carpeted the valley and new calves dotted the pastures of the restored ranch. The ceremony was held outdoors, beneath the spreading branches of an old oak tree, with Jack Byrne standing as Quentin's best man and half the town in attendance. As Zara walked toward Quentin, radiant in a simple white dress that bore no resemblance to the elaborate gown she had abandoned nearly a year before, she reflected on the strange, winding path that had brought her to this moment. The fear and danger they had faced seemed distant now, like scenes from someone else's life. Lawrence Blackwood had eventually been captured trying to cross into Canada, his once handsome face disfigured by the wound Quentin had inflicted. He was serving a lengthy prison sentence in Denver, his empire dismantled, his name synonymous with fraud and corruption. But today, Zara had no thoughts to spare for Lawrence. Today was about beginnings, not endings, about the life she and Quentin would build together on this land that had known both sorrow and joy. "You look beautiful," Quentin murmured as she reached him, his eyes shining with love and pride. "So do you," she replied, taking in his formal suit and freshly trimmed hair. He had come a long way from the dusty cowboy who had appeared like a guardian angel behind the church in Silver Creek. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises to cherish and support each other through all the seasons of their lives together. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Quentin drew Zara into his arms for a kiss that sealed their bond and drew appreciative cheers from the assembled guests. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing, food and laughter. As twilight descended, Quentin found Zara sitting on the porch of their home, watching their friends and neighbors enjoying the festivities. "Happy, Mrs. Hayes?" he asked, sitting beside her and taking her hand in his. "Completely," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "And you?" "More than I ever thought possible," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be sitting here, married to the most beautiful, courageous woman in the territory, master of a thriving ranch, surrounded by friends, I'd have thought they were spinning tall tales." Zara smiled, understanding perfectly. "Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? Taking us down paths we never expected." "Some paths are worth every step," Quentin said, his voice soft with emotion. "Even the difficult ones." As night fell fully, stars appearing one by one in the velvet sky, Zara thought of that desperate day behind the church, of the fear that had driven her to hide, of the cowboy who had appeared with his outstretched hand and changed her life forever. "I love you, Quentin Hayes," she said, turning to meet his gaze in the gentle light spilling from the windows of their home. "And I love you, Zara Hayes," he replied, the name still new and wonderful on his tongue. "Yesterday, today, and all the tomorrows we'll share." In the years that followed, the Hayes Ranch became one of the most prosperous in the territory. Quentin's innovative ranching methods and Zara's shrewd business sense proved a formidable combination. They expanded their holdings, built the larger home they had dreamed of, and welcomed children who grew up strong and free in the shadow of the mountains. Jack Byrne did indeed move to Silver Creek, opening a more respectable establishment than his Denver saloon, and eventually marrying the widowed daughter of a local merchant. He remained a constant presence in the Hayes family's life, a beloved uncle to their children, and a steadfast friend through good times and bad. And on quiet evenings, when the day's work was done and their children were asleep, Zara and Quentin would sometimes sit on their porch, hands linked, and remember the unlikely beginning of their love story. A frightened bride, a compassionate cowboy, and the simple question that had changed everything. You coming with me? The answer, they both knew, had always been yes.